right, good evening. Welcome to Periodic Tables. Thank you so much for being here. I'm really excited. I know I say that every month, but I mean it every month. And before I further convey that excitement, I'm going to convey excitement about next month, Thursday, December 12th. We're going to have Rachel Lance, author of the book Chamber Divers. I'm just going to shamelessly read from her press kit. 2 summers before Allied troops stormed the beaches of Normandy on D-Day, there was another Allied landing that has been lost to public memory. In 1942, over 7,000 troops rushed the beaches in Dieppe, France, but only a few hundred survived. It was nothing short of a massacre and a wake-up call to the Allies that a key element of their planning needed an overhaul: intelligence. A lot of things need intelligence. Without sufficient knowledge of landing conditions, underwater obstacles, and enemy artillery placement, the Allied troops would never be able to push inland and win the war, but the path to intelligence had hit a roadblock. Scouting by land and sky wasn't effective. In her latest book, Chamber Divers, Rachel Lance tells the unbelievable saga of the scientists, men and women, who made it possible for Allied troops to breathe and scout underwater, an advancement that would ultimately help win the war and change underwater exploration forever. So I read this book recently, and what I love about it is it really is kind of a meditation on self-experimentation, and when people do really crazy things to themselves in service of a higher cause. Okay, so I hope you'll be here for that. This month's speaker, Stacey Pigg from North Carolina State, and I'm about to say words that I don't think have ever been spoken at periodic tables, and that is from the Department of English. And it gives me such pleasure to say that. She is a professor of technical and scientific communication and director of graduate programs in the Department of English. She's published over 40 articles and one book focused on how digital and networked writing practices shape work, learning, and engagement across academic and professional contexts. And the reason she came to my attention was she got a shout out in the New Yorker from Cal Newport in a story that appeared a couple months ago called something like, "What kind of writer is ChatGPT?" And so here to help us answer that question is Stacey Pigg.
Thank you so much, everyone. I'm so excited to be here. I was just saying out there that when Misha emailed me, I answered in like 90 seconds because I was so excited about the opportunity to talk somewhere like this with a crowd like this. So thank you so much for the opportunity. So just to sort of give you a reminder of the lay of the land we're working in, I'm going to be talking about changes in our everyday writing practices that emerge from several free or relatively inexpensive generative AI platforms that became available to the public in December 2022. And so, first to reach the public were some of the text-to-image platforms like Midjourney and DALL-E. But then closely following in December 2022 was ChatGPT, which is the platform many of you are probably most familiar with if you're someone like me who doesn't work in this science. I want to make sure you know that these platforms and tools are built on a science that's been developing for many years, including natural language processing research dating back to the 60s, deep learning science that goes back even farther than that. And so that's really an important history to talk about. Today, I'm not going to be broaching that because, again, that's not my expertise. I'm here from the English department at NC State. And I'm going to be talking about how these platforms and technologies impact the rest of us, those of us who are implementing and putting these technologies into our everyday practices at work, at school, for the students that I work with at NC State, and even in, all sorts of ways. There are many more platforms, though, that are new and around and available. I even played with one last week at a conference that generates 3D. It generates the code for making 3D objects out of text. So there are all sorts of generative AI technologies to play with now. I'm mostly going to be talking about ChatGPT in a sort of general way because when the moment when I did the study I'll be talking from today was sort of the moment for ChatGPT to become integrated into writing practices. I also want to just make sure that it's clear that people are also using generative AI and large language models in ways that are much more tailored to context than ChatGPT is. It's a huge, generic sort of large language model that's pulling from text all over the internet. And so when we're thinking about the way that these technologies can affect writing practices, I'm really talking about these sort of publicly available, huge tools that any of our students or any of us might have access to on a daily basis. Okay. So I'm sure this room is filled with people that have different kinds of relationships to these kinds of tools. You may be early adopters who've used them in work. You may be people who have no relationship to them whatsoever. What I can tell you, though, is that when writing teachers learned about these tools, they all had a similar kind of reaction, and it wasn't necessarily a positive one. And the reason for this is that, I'm going to show you the exact reason. No longer can we naively say to our students, please read an article or book on X subject and write back to us, an informal, discussion board, for example, posting in which you talk to us about an important quotation that you found in the reading and what it means to you for argument. Because they can go to ChatGPT and they can do something like this. And I'm going to go back to that really quickly so you can just see my prompt. What I wrote there is, give me a quotation from Donald Norman's The Design of Everyday Things. I picked a completely random book, and that reflects on how that quotation supports the central argument of the text. The post should be about 500 words overall and written in the voice of a college student. Add a few typos for flair, always good. And so, here's what ChatGPT created. Spoiler alert, it is also longer than 500 words. ChatGPT has a lot to say. It keeps going. You can sort of pick up, if you're looking at it, at the little things that the model does to try to make it sound like a college student's voice. And I mean, if you look at this, it's not bad for a discussion board posting. I mean, it's an informal piece of writing, but it's something that I imagine if it came through many of the writing teachers, inboxes or their teaching folders, this is going to look like something that belongs in this voice. I have a lot of video here. We'll see how it does. And so I've shown you now that ChatGPT can do pretty well on an assignment that might be in a writing class that's an informal piece of writing, but how would it do on a formal research project? So here's an example of that. And these are from like 2 days ago when I was playing with this. So here's the prompt. Write me a short research proposal appropriate for a junior level science communication class. It should show my ability to synthesize secondary research and form a scientific research plan. Please follow the typical conventions for this genre and use paraphrasing and correct citations. So let's see. Again, it has a lot to say. All right, so on the surface, not bad. You can see that ChatGPT is able to produce a document that meets some of the standard genre conventions, what we would expect to see for this kind of writing. It's a piece of writing that, if we were looking at it from a surface level, not reading it very closely, would likely do fine in a writing course. And so, ChatGPT can help with everything you do in a writing course, and this creates a lot of problems for writing learning. What we know, though, is things are always more complex in practice than what it might seem like on the surface. And so while ChatGPT can respond to any prompt we provide it, that doesn't mean the output will be successful in meeting the needs of the audiences that we write for. And often when you really dig into the output that's created by ChatGPT, if you're a writing teacher who cares about carefully crafted prose for an audience who will be reading and responding to it, it's often off base in lots of ways. It's generic in its focus. It's not specific enough. And it also doesn't mean that the students or professionals who are using ChatGPT to write are using it in the way that I just demonstrated to you, to write a wholesale document without doing more to it or without breaking down the prompts that they might be using in order to create writing from an interaction with ChatGPT. And so the question that I wanted to bring to this whole sort of wild world that we live in now is just, how are people using ChatGPT and writing processes in their everyday lives? And what does that mean for how we write and learn to do research today, now that these tools are available? I attempted to get some early insight on this question by listening to and watching people who were early adopters share their footage of generative AI and how they were using it. That means I watched a lot of YouTube and TikTok in 2023. I paid attention both to students sharing footage of their own practices, but also to expert writers who are writing specifically to advise others on best practices of how to incorporate generative AI into their writing and research practice. Because of my own interest in scientific communication and also because of some of the unique features about ChatGPT that I'll talk about more in a minute, I was really interested in looking specifically at how folks were using ChatGPT or other generative AI technologies in their research writing practice. And so that was the focus. And again, I was really focused on these very large, generic, publicly available LLMs and generative AI technologies. And so what I learned was really interesting. Writers are not using generative AI in just one way. They're not using it just to create full-cell text like you saw me show you earlier. Specifically, in this article that you can see here, I identified 46 uses of generative AI by the folks who were writing in the samples that I found, and they really cover the full realm of activities that one might do while researching. And I'll show you a little bit about what that means here now. So, by the full span of research activities in writing, I mean that people are using generative AI in concert with just about every part of research you could imagine is part of where writing might intersect with research practices. Everywhere from identifying research gaps to respond to interacting with secondary literature and research, to finding things to read, to planning their research designs, to writing up genres, to translating their findings for public audiences. Just about everything you can imagine doing that involves writing, people are posting themselves doing with ChatGPT. And so here are some examples just to show you a few. So an example of someone identifying a research gap using ChatGPT here. And all of these are sort of hypothetical situations where someone is describing how they might use the tool.
As well. So let's see if ChatGPT can suggest us any good research gaps on a specific topic. I'm asking ChatGPT to suggest a research gap on native speakerism in English language teaching. The main reason for this, why I chose this topic, is this is what I have been publishing papers in. So I'll be able to assess whether these research gaps make any sense. So let's see what ChatGPT gives us. All right, so this is what it gives us, right? And anytime I use it, I'm more and more surprised by what it can give us. It's spot on. The impact of native speakerism on language assessment and testing practices, it definitely hasn't been assessed that much. To the best of my knowledge, there are one or two publications, but it's definitely a big area that could still be studied further. And if you've watched my other videos on how to actually present the research gap, you will notice that this is really, really well presented. Because, ChatGPT in here says, while research has examined X, Y, and Z, there is still limited research on that affects the design and evaluation of language proficiency tests, given the widespread, So,
All right. Example of identifying a research gap. Example here of planning a research design.
Okay, too many people asking ChatGPT. Okay, so of course ChatGPT is always eager to point out that suggestions depend on context and site conditions, but 20 to 30 participants is actually a good ballpark, and so I could ask for tips regarding the experimental design.
Ample output, always.
Okay, this is all good advice. So we could try to elucidate ideas for follow-up work. Okay, so the suggestions are a bit generic. Yeah.
My favorite part. Okay, and finally, translating findings for public audiences. I think you can call this a public audience.
Can you explain this research to a 12-year-old? And we get, sure, so this research was all about how well different types of wetland plants like mangroves and salt marsh grasses can adapt to rising sea levels. When the sea level goes up, it can be hard for these plants to survive because they can get flooded by the water. So the researchers wanted to see how well different types of wetland plants can cope with this kind of change. To do this, they set up a bunch of plots with different types of plants in them and then measured how well the plants were doing over.
You sort of get the idea there. So basically, anything you can imagine being part of a research process that would involve writing or communication in some ways, you can find someone using ChatGPT to do this. Yikes.
How about, can you explain this research?
Get out of there. Okay. What I found interesting on top of this, and you saw a little bit of this even from the prior videos, is that when ChatGPT, in my opinion, is used most effectively for all of these kinds of processes related to research writing, it tends to be when it happens in a cycle of three things. Requesting or prompting, I think, is the more common way that we're talking about what it means to ask something of ChatGPT. It's always in a conversational mode, so it's always requesting or asking or wanting something of the system, but also evaluating the content. And you saw some of this in those first two videos in which the writers immediately make judgments and critique the output that comes back from the system, and then refining based on the evaluation and critique of the writing or output that comes out of the system. And so I believe ChatGPT interactions are most fruitful when all three of these elements are involved in the interaction. And so just to give you a little bit more of an overview here, just so you know some of the things that were present in the research, some kinds of requesting that I saw were requests for secondary research help, pre-writing help, research report elements, help me write the beginning of an introduction, editing and revision, outreach, methodological or research design help. You saw some of these things already. The kinds of evaluating that I saw, folks were evaluating for reference quality or existence, like do references even exist in what was returned from ChatGPT, for meeting genre expectations, coherence of meaning, alignment with a writer's goals, specificity. There's a lot of talk about sort of generic use of the tool, plagiarism scores and AI detection scores. I'll talk more about this later, and also audience appropriateness. And by refining what I saw happening were requests of the tool to create or provide more creative, detailed, or improved output based on what a writer learned from what was returned the first time from a request or prompt. I'm requesting completion or continuation of a thought. Please give me more ideas. providing an example text, providing content from the research project, requesting output that better meets genre expectations, or repurposing prior output as new prompts. This is not complete, just an idea, just a sample here to give you some ideas of the kind of requesting, evaluating, and refining I saw in the system. What often happens, though, I think, is that some of the reasons that both writers who are students and professionals turn to ChatGPT lead them to often stop at the level of requesting and to leave out the issues of evaluating and refining that I think make a more complete way of working with ChatGPT or other generative AI tools. And so I'll give you an example here of what it looks like when a writer, I think, is using all three of those parts. So in this writer, an example, the writer requests output from ChatGPT. She evaluates the content to determine whether it's factually accurate, but also whether the writing actually meets the conventions of an introduction of a scholarly research paper, which is what she's working on. And then based on her evaluation, you can see her create prompts that further refine the output. And she also discusses how she would directly work with, change, edit, and alter the work there. So I'll show you this.
So the first step is if I was writing, so let's say I'm writing a scholarly research article on how steroid isomers are separated by ion mobility spectrometry using merization and group 1 metal adduction. So this was my first research paper. Let's say this is what I'm writing on. And I'm going to say, I just don't know what's my first sentence. I don't know what to write. So I'm going to say, could you write an introduction for this paper? So what I'm telling it is what I want my research article to be about. And now I'm saying, okay, what's a draft of an introduction that I could have for this paper? So I'm going to let this go ahead and finish. Okay, so this is the introduction it gave me. It gave me a 3-paragraph introduction. And really, if you look at any of my content on introductions, this is really telling me the background knowledge and a little bit of significance. Like, that's what it's giving me right here. It's not giving me the background literature parts of an introduction or anything like that. So already, this is not enough to just copy and paste into your article and get started. So it's giving me these different parts. It's telling me what ion mobility is used for. It's telling me why it's difficult to separate steroids and the recent development. It's talking about what multimerization is in group 1 metal adducts. And then it's talking about the aims, right? The aims of this paper is to do these different things. That's all really helpful, and that's a really, really good example. So now maybe I can come from this and I can say, okay, the first thing I'm going to talk about is ion mobility. Maybe I use something similar to this sentence. Maybe I change it a little bit to make it more specific for what I'm talking about. So it's a widely used analytical technique for detection and identification of compounds. Well, I'm not really talking about that. I'm talking about separation. So I can maybe pull that in instead of using what ChatGPT gave me. IMS is particularly used for small polar compounds, including steroid isomers. Steroid isomers are actually non-polar, so like as a chemist, I need to change these things. It's not giving me exactly what I would need to just be able to submit it. And then I could, between this and this, I would talk about steroids. I would go, steroids are compounds that do this. This is why they're interesting to study. And then have, this is challenging because of this. So you can already see, I can use ChatGPT as a starting point. If I can't figure out how to do step 1, it gives me something to start editing.
All right, so you get the idea here. This is a writer who has expert knowledge both about the disciplinary content they're working with, but also about the writing conventions that are required in order to complete this piece of writing. They're treating ChatGPT a little bit like a faulty research assistant, like someone who could create something that is, approximating what it is to do the thing, but with the idea that one would need to go into some great detail in order to actually make this something usable. You can see here that this is a writer who is treating ChatGPT not as an authority, but again, as something like a partner, but a faulty one.
Gives me something to start working. So the first step.
All right. But again, I think that many research writers are turning to ChatGPT because they have certain problems that they're trying to solve or to find solutions for. And so I see students turning to generative AI when they're struggling with writer's block, when they don't know how to meet the genre conventions of something they're asked to do, or when they're just stuck. And I see a lot of expert writers turning to ChatGPT because of productivity standards and because of the need to create and produce more and more text. And I think in these moments, I think it's very easy to see how either evaluating and refining just sort of falls off the face of what it means to use ChatGPT. We're just requesting things and using it, or the evaluating and refining that we do looks a lot different from the example I just showed you. And so this is a student, and this is a video from TikTok. It doesn't depict very much of the actual exchange between the student and ChatGPT, but the TikTok overlay, and you won't be able to see it super well here, says, I started understanding subjects so much better when I used ChatGPT to explain them to me. I don't have to feel embarrassed about asking too many questions, and I can get an explanation as detailed or as simple as I need in seconds. And this was really a common theme. Students expressed an appreciation for ChatGPT's ability to be there at any time and to, again, be something like a research assistant, though not faulty, often as an authority.
Amy got lucky. Take it from him and not leave him with nothing. She wanna go viral. Amy got lucky.
And this is a really common theme. Students are talking about ChatGPT as something that can help them answer questions they have when they're interacting with content that's difficult for them, and that sort of thing. Now, following from this knowledge problem, the depictions of generative AI that I analyzed also showed how non-expert users often use plagiarism detection tools in order to attempt to bypass plagiarism detection by journals or in classroom scenarios. So this is the video I'm going to show you here. In these cases, writers do practice a kind of evaluation and refining, but it's not an evaluation and refining in order to produce more quality content. It's an evaluation and refining to attempt to bypass the systems that would detect their AI use in the first place. And so these are some of the most, I think, difficult to, try to make sense of how we respond to, but I want to show you an example of that here.
Take the sequence by our own, and then we'll move toward the second step, which is by using different paraphrases. So let me go back to this. So I'm copying this same paragraph. So you can use separate file, word file. Okay, so I'm just altering the words, maybe the positions of the words here and there. Career fluids such as otter, oil and otter. So I'm just converting this into otter or oil. So they are composed of carrier fluids such as otter or oil, where micrometer size minor particles are dispersed or are dispersed. You can use synonyms as well. Okay, so you have to just remove this part. Now you have just moved this part to the beginning. That is the only thing that you have changed. Okay, now we'll see whether what is happened to this AI score. Just go back to this copy link, and I am just pasting the modified text and check.
It's human text now.
Here now we will see
All they
that
had to do
I
was move
only
around three
changed the
phrases.
sequence of one sentence, and now it is showing this is a human text. Okay, if you copy the same text here under this tool 0 GPT, we will see what happened, whether it has reduced AI score or not. Okay, here also you can see that it is showing 0% AI GPT, means the complete text is written by human. So this is the one way that you can do. You can just modify, you may use some synonyms or change the sequence of words. You can just move the words here and there. But what I'll prefer is, see, this is a time consuming process, and hence you may move towards either this paraphrasing tool, which is a Quillboard, or this is WordTune. I personally prefer WordTune because of its accuracy. So if you need any of these subscriptions in a reasonable cost or discounted cost, then definitely we have given our email ID in this video description. You can contact us. Obviously the free version is also available, but the free version is available with the limited number of words and with limited features. So just convert that text. Let's go back to the ChatGPT, copy the same paragraph, control copy. So first I'll be copying this here under this Quillboard. Okay, then you have to click on paraphrase. So here on the right side, the complete text is ready. Okay, so you have to copy the text from here. This is a modified text. The little problem with the Quillboard that the Quillboard may replace few non-technical words, but obviously you can change the words. If you want to change this response word, you will be getting several other choices, so that would be there, but still little manual attention is required. So you have to copy from here, and then again we'll go back to this copy links, then paste that text and check. So here again you will see that this is a human text. Okay.
All right, so there's a, history of technology tells us that often when we integrate tools to enhance productivity, those tools or technologies tend to come with their own suite of additional technologies and tools that become add-ons to the process. And so, it's sort of interesting to see that something as that seems like a time saver for folks, going to ChatGPT ends up having all these additional steps that need to be taken in order to bypass these systems. And I see work like this, again, being driven. The evaluation here is happening. People are evaluating the output that's coming out of ChatGPT before putting it into their formal writing, but they're doing so in a way that's driven more by productivity than by making better science. And so I think this is something to sort of keep in mind here.
Simulate the sequence.
The other thing I want to bring up is just the idea of a narrative behind all of these uses of ChatGPT that assume that there's an easy way to define what's a mundane enough task to automate and offload to technology versus what's a meaningful task that needs to be retained by humans. But as you watch these uses of ChatGPT for writing practices, it becomes really difficult to tease out what's mundane and what's meaningful. Is reading mundane or meaningful? Is creating research designs mundane or meaningful? Where do the parts of research stop that we want to make sure are handled by humans? And where do the things start that are the kinds of things we're fine with handing off to machines? And I think this is going to be a central question for us. And so, in terms of is ChatGPT, our generative AI technologies partners or plagiarists? I mean, they're really both. They have the opportunity to be huge. And, the thing is, this is not new in the study of how technology impacts writing. When we think of social media, for example, we know that social media has opened many doors to discourse for many people, at the same time that it's created lots of challenges and difficulties around, surveillance logics and social isolation and mental health outcomes. And so these things are always going to be murky, and that's important to remember with ChatGPT. One important point I think to remember is that scholars have argued that ChatGPT is creating more access for people to produce standard written English. So for example, ChatGPT may have the possibility to alleviate some of the linguistic disparities for scientific researchers who are not native English speakers. And so, editing and proofreading becomes more accessible to people. On the flip side of that, we have to worry about things like standardization. Is the voice that's coming out of ChatGPT going to create something more like a generic voice that we expect to hear? And if you spent much time with ChatGPT, it's not a very pleasing voice most of the time. You know, similarly, I think there's much promise in the idea that ChatGPT can be a partner for students to get answers to questions, to get ideas for how to get started when they're struggling with writing processes. You know, but at the same time, I think we have to really worry about the idea of treating ChatGPT's outputs as an authority. I mean, you've seen this in the way that experts can sort of break down the problems with the writing. In a writing classroom, it's much the same way. You know, at this point in time, it's not difficult to tell when a student is using ChatGPT most of the time, especially if they're not interacting with it in complex kinds of ways. The final thing I wanted to say here is that I think detection and plagiarism detection as a way to think about the use of generative AI in writing practices is going to be a difficult framework to work with for all of the reasons that you've seen today. I think for ChatGPT, really, the cat's already out of the bag here. I think we're already working with these technologies. They're already integrated into processes in a very widespread way. I think what we're seeing is very much more a widespread change in the cultural practices around what it means to do writing than something that we're going to want to try to in a classroom kind of detect and you know, control. And so, you know, I wanted to bring up the other quotation, and this is from one of the videos. And you know, this is a scientist saying, if you literally just want to put in a prompt and have it write a lit review so that you can publish it, you really have to question your motives for being in this career field. And I mean, it's interesting to think about where those pressures around productivity are causing kind of clashes with the desire to use these kind of tools to produce better science. And I think this is something that we're going to want to keep in mind. And so, you know, for me, as I'm thinking about this as a shift in culture, here are the kinds of questions I'm thinking about. Will writing be reframed as a cycle of requesting, evaluating, refining? Is it going to be something much more like an editing process that's a sort of back and forth conversation? This is something that, you know, resonates really well, actually, with a lot of the theories of writing that have existed for a long time, that really position writing much more as a social practice rather than something that's a sort of individual internal cognitive process. And so I think externalizing that kind of dialogue in some ways may be really positive. What's meaningful and what's mundane in writing? What do we want to think is okay to offload to our technologies, and what do we want to think that humans really need to hold on to? And then finally, how do we, and by we I really mean developing students, gain the knowledge they need to critique the output of generative AI systems? Because what I see a lot are videos that are tutorials for students that really encourage students to critique the output of these systems. However, if you haven't developed the knowledge to know what the disciplinary content is, or to know what the genre expectations are, what audiences would expect from the kind of writing that you are practicing, I don't think you have the knowledge needed to critique the output. And as ChatGPT and generative AI becomes more integrated in our writing practices, I think we're going to have to ask this question: how do we develop the knowledge needed to critique these tools? And so that's all I have for you. I'm really excited to talk to you more. I hope you have some questions, and that we can have a conversation about some of these changes and what I think really is a large cultural shift in this moment. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. So I'm going to assert moderator privilege.
Please do.
I'm wondering, did you try multiple platforms, and if so, was there a difference?
There's definitely a difference, I think. I mean, for purposes of this, research that I initially did, I mean, I was really trying to get the earliest adopters of the largest systems. So I was just looking at how people were talking about really ChatGPT and a little bit of Bing at the moment. So I was really looking at those large-scale systems. But I mean, I think we know that, I mean, the science around this can develop large language models that are much more tailored to the writing styles, the content knowledge around specific discourses and communities. And so, I mean, there's absolutely the potential to build systems that will be more helpful to writers in particular areas. And I think that that's one direction that this research is going to go when it comes to writing. We'll see more tailored tools. We'll see technologies that are actually designed to be helpful for writing conversations rather than folks kind of trying to use very generic tools for very specialized work.
Questions?
I know there's some interest in the AI offerings embedding watermarks in their output. Is that a feasible solution to this, or is that just kind of a mirage because others will create ones that don't have watermarks?
I mean, I have no idea what the answer is for the very specific, tactics that we're going to have to take to help people understand how to deal with these things. I mean, images are really a whole nother conversation, because you're right. Now there's the ability to generate images that are passed off, very easily, except that the people always have 6 fingers, right? They're passed off very easily to folks as things that are, real representations. And like, how do we make it clear that those things are generated? I mean, what are the kinds of marks of transparency that creators need to use in order to help people understand where these things came from, to understand the kind of tool that created them, to understand like what the best practices for circulation of those kinds of things are, but in the end, like you said, these things they're not controllable in that way. I mean, we have to take the steps that we can take to try to make them more transparent and understandable for folks who come into contact with them. But we know at the same time that ultimately, there are workarounds, there are ways to get past these things, and, it just never stops, I think.
First of all, thank you. That was really interesting. Thanks for sharing all that. I think the intuitive concern or fear that a lot of instructors have is that by students taking the easy way out and using ChatGPT, they're not doing the critical thinking that and the learning to write through writing and critique that will make them really able to master the topic. But do we have any data to demonstrate that? Has it been around long enough? Have people done the experiment to show that when students, quote, take the easy way out by having ChatGPT do the work for them, that there are learning deficits from that? Or do we just not have those data yet?
I don't think we know yet. I mean, I think we know that in situations, I think what we maybe assume, maybe know is the wrong term, especially at the Science Cafe. I think I think our sense is that if students are not understanding what the technology is and does and produces, then they're likely to be using it in a way that does not allow them to interact with the content in a sophisticated way. And I think that that's in some ways the step one, and I think we're getting there already. I mean, I'm really proud of what we've done in the English department at NC State to try to make courses about this, to make sure that students are getting in there to understand the history, to understand, what it is that ChatGPT is returning. Where did these where did the LLMs come from? Where does the data come from that's creating this? I mean, if you thought Wikipedia was a bad citation, ChatGPT is sort of in some ways the worst of everything that's sort of mediocre, kind of put together to create language. I said that on tape. But yeah, I mean, I think I don't think we know the long-term story of this yet, especially when students can understand what the tool is, what it creates, what it's useful for, and what it can help them do and not help them do. And I mean, I think that those things are going to take time. They're going to take time to put into our writing classes, because I mean, this really is going to change the curriculum, I think, for what a writing class looks like at a basic level.
So, what is your lived practice? Do you police your students?
I do not. You know, so I heard a really good metaphor for this, and so I like to say it. My way of thinking about generative AI technologies are that they're like a kind of 10-year-old who wants to have a puppy. So if you want to have a puppy in my class that is generative AI, I'm fine with you using it. But when you turn in a paper that is not well oriented to the assignment, that is not speaking to the audience it needs to speak to, you know, then the puppy has to go. And so, you know, I think that I'm on the side, and I think this was clear, that generative AI technologies are going to be a part of our lives. If students are not writing for and with them, they're still going to be writing in the presence of them. They're going to be writing in a culture that is shaped by them. I don't think that means that every writing situation should include ChatGPT. I feel the same way about laptops. Sometimes I think it's a good idea to have a class, you know, in the university where laptops are not allowed, because they're so inundated in our lives and screens are such a part of what we do that sometimes it's a good idea to escape them. And I think it'll be the same way with generative AI. There will be moments when we need to step away from it. But at the same time, I think I'm in the position, and the students I usually teach are going to be going into professions, and they're going to be going into cultures where this is going to be a part of their lives. And so for me, it's much more, how do we cultivate an effective use of this kind of technology, understanding what it is, understanding what it can do, and understanding where we need to treat it, again, like the faulty research assistant and not like the authority.
Without a sufficient knowledge base, having done the reading to then write the paper, how can students have sufficient cognitive epistemology of whatever they're, you know, purporting to write about, to be able to discern what is truth and what is not?
I think you've kind of hit on it, that reading is actually what I'm a little bit more concerned about with generative AI. And, you know, I'm a writing, in terms of, you know, where I come from and my research, I'm focused on writing. But I actually think reading may be the problem here. I think we're already, you know, outside of generative AI technology, seeing a shift away from the love of reading and enjoyment of reading and the sort of deep dive into reading just as a part of, you know, students' everyday life and practice. And a lot of what I saw here, and I don't think I gave you an example of this, but a lot of the student examples I saw were students saying, I can't really read and comprehend, so I put my article into ChatGPT to ask it to give me bullet points. And that's not going to create a kind of deep understanding that we're looking for. And so I'm actually more worried and concerned about reading. I do think there are some, I did see some evidence, and it's sort of aligned with other ways of thinking about reading at scale that were interesting in using generative AI. So ways of kind of understanding literature at a broad level and trends and those sorts of things that I think were promising when it comes to reading. But when it comes to really sort of interacting deeply with a particular text, this is going to be a place, I think, where we're going to have to find ways to turn off the machine. Yeah.
So I understand that your focus is scientific and technical writing, but you're in the Department of English.
Yes.
I imagine you have colleagues who are, you know, focused on fiction and et cetera. And in my own just minor dabbling, I've been startled at both how good and how bad, depending on the context, the results will be with certain prompts when asked to write something creative. And I was just wondering if you had thoughts on that.
It's really actually become a problem in more than one way, because the other issue that I didn't even broach here is the issue of the intellectual property issues around these tools. And so when students put prompts or ideas or even another student's writing, for example, into the system, the system owns that writing. And so there are not only problems, I think, around just thinking what is creative work going to look like in a world shaped by these technologies, but also like what are we going to do about the intellectual property associated with words that are meaningful and original in that way. And our MFA, yes, I work closely with the MFA program at NC State, and they do not allow any uses of the technology, and it's for that reason. But again, I mean, there have been, and I'm sure you all know this, instances of ChatGPT, or at least generative AI generated texts that have won awards for fiction. I mean, this has already happened. And so, I mean, we are in that world where creativity is going to be shaped by these tools as well. I mean, we're seeing the same thing with images. I mean, creativity is going to come in dialogue with, the existence of these tools in our world.
I hope I can ask this question in a way that's understandable, but a few of us were at a talk earlier today about the Nasher exhibit that was AI partnered, is the way they described it.
Oh, good. Yeah, I like that.
Yeah. And one of the comments that came up is the energy use of
yes,
AI,
this is
and
huge.
some of the ethics around that. So if you were to ask a really broad question, like looking at the sociological literature around workplace inequity between 1950 and the present time, generate, 6 unanswered questions that would be appropriate for research. From an energy perspective, is this going to give you an answer fast by going really wide in its bandwidth of use? And are those kind of things that we need to worry about in terms of broad usage and energy?
I think this is a great question. I mean, what I think is interesting is I think we're moving, and we've been moving this way for a long time, from a world in which writing was a sort of scarcity and into a world in which writing and this kind of creative output is much more a surplus. And what we're seeing is a kind of use of energy for writing that's not needed. In some ways, it's very wasteful. I mean, when you think about the environmental repercussions of the kind of tools and technologies that we're talking about, I think a sort of I think this is going to have to be part of our conversations in the long run. I don't think we can think about this purely as, an intellectual issue. I think we have to think of it as a material issue that's going to affect, the world and livelihoods. And so, I don't think we've reached a point, most of us, some of us probably have, where we think about energy output in that way, about conserving what it means to draw on a tool like this and to use the energy resources appropriately and effectively and ethically. But I think that's going to be a part of the conversation. I think it will have to be, because it's a great point. If you look into just the effects that these things are going to have in the long run, it's huge. It's huge. I don't think we've quite gotten there to helping students think through these issues through that lens, but I think it's really important and helpful.
Sorry, me again. So at a school like NC State, you're going to have a range of students who take courses in the English department.
Yes.
You're going to have the MFA students and the literature majors and the students who love to read and love the craft of writing and want to become writers themselves. And then you're going to have the engineering students. I'm the father of an NC State engineering grad. He's a brilliant aerospace engineer, but he was forced to take a freshman writing class.
And probably G331.
It was before ChatGPT, though.
Yeah.
But I know that if he could have had ChatGPT do all of his writing, so he could have spent more time building drones and airplanes, he would have been happy to do that, and it would have been a perfect use of technology in his mind, And so I'm wondering if you've seen personally, or if you have anecdotal evidence of really a range of attitudes and perceptions about ChatGPT and the ethics of using it based on sort of, people's own interests and lived experiences with communication and writing and reading.
Definitely. And I mean, to be fair, too, the kinds of fields and professions they're going to go into are going to have vastly different attitudes about these things. And they should. I mean, because the kinds of writing produced in different fields do different kinds of work. And I mean, I'm a professor of scientific and technical communication. I was the director of the professional writing program, which was our advanced writing courses for engineers, scientists, and business students. And so, I mean, the folks teaching those classes are really the ones who are doing the Sheldon paper bag, because, I mean, those really are kinds of writing that are important to learn for many reasons. I mean, we need to be able to understand how the people who are ultimately going to read the kind of writing we produce about complex subjects come to that writing. Like, what are their expectations? What do they need? It's an important exercise to learn those skills, not just to produce the writing itself, but to gain that rhetorical knowledge of how do we interact with audiences at a basic level and explain very complex and hard things. And so, yes, the people who teach those courses, the engineering courses in particular, are very worried about ChatGPT. And I think it's there where we've been having a lot of these discussions about detection versus talking about the tool as an active part of practice. Because again, those students in particular, I think, are going to be using ChatGPT. They're going to be using generative AI. Many of them are working on this. They're working on this science, and technology is part of what they do. And so for me, that's why I want to make those an active part of the classroom, to talk about them, to talk about what they mean, when they're helpful, and what it means to put them away to try to understand how to build some skills and rhetorical knowledge, as I think about it, so that we understand not just how the technology works, but how the writing works, and what it means to write a text that actually reaches its users in a way that's compelling. But yeah, they're definitely there are definitely worries among that writing teacher group.
All right, we are at time, so let's thank Professor Pigg one more time. And thank you all for being here. Just as a reminder, this is a money-losing proposition for us. We want to keep it free. There is a QR code on the bar if you want to chip in a couple simoleons to help keep it free. Yes, Travis is helpfully posing with it. Yes, and we will look forward to seeing you on Thursday, December 12th for Rachel Lance. Thank you.